that good there? Is that right? Our voyage is over. Now what? What comes next? Some of us think we know what we're returning to. Some of us haven't much of a clue what's ahead. But either way, along with the sorting through and the packing up, along with the leave takings and goodbyes, each and every one of us has one crucial piece of work to perform. Each and every one of us has to compose an internal story of the voyage to tell him or herself. A story that makes the voyage comprehensible and merges it with the other ongoing stories we tell ourselves about ourselves to help us live our lives. What does the voyage mean? What did the voyage mean? What does it amount to? In thinking about a couple of approaches to these questions, let's just remind ourselves about the word travel. It comes from the Middle English, travailen, and it meant to toil, to make a toilsome journey. In turn, that word came from the old French travailler, and it meant to travail, to work hard. So somebody somewhere, somebody old French, associated traveling with travail. And no doubt, in that time, travel and travail had much in common. Travel by horse or foot, vulnerable to the elements, the difficulties of terrain, robbers and bandits, crude accommodations, few creature comforts. But even with all the creature comforts we've enjoyed here, travel's a complicated thing, perhaps involving travail in another way. And I want to try to get at that by looking at two quotations from two 19th century American writers. The first is Ralph Waldo Emerson, writing in his important essay, Self-Reliance, in 1841, and this is what he has to say about travel. Traveling is a fool's paradise. Our first journeys discover to us the indifference of places. He means the irrelevance of places. At home, I dream that at Naples, at Rome, I can be intoxicated with beauty and lose my sadness. I pack my trunk, embrace my friends, embark on the sea, and at last wake up in Naples, and there beside me is the stern fact, the sad self, unrelenting, identical, that I fled from. My giant goes with me wherever I go. 65 years into the American experiment, Emerson describes travel in this skeptical, dismissive way, partly because he wants Americans to quit looking abroad to Europe for their culture and to start to invent a culture of their own. But he also describes travel this way partly because it's true. Wherever we travel, we take ourselves with us. And although many of us want to tell ourselves stories about our travels that go something like, "This voyage has changed me forever," or "I'm a completely different person now," in fact, the disorders and complexes and syndromes we brought up the gangway with us when we boarded are pretty much the same ones we're going to be taking back down the gangway with us when we disembark tomorrow. The stern, harsh fact is that it's not the voyage that shapes ourselves, it's ourselves that shape the voyage. Sure, you've been to a township in South Africa, or the Taj Mahal, or the Great Wall of China, but in each case, the inescapable contours of yourself determined how much of each place you were able to take in, absorb, digest. Just as indelibly as each new immigration officer stamps your passport, your individual self stamps the nature and quality of your experience as you travel. None of us wants to respond to the question, "How was the voyage?" with something downbeat like, "Well, It included many elations, exhilarations, and ecstasies, which I would like to think of as having permanently transformative effects on me. But, in fact, after a week, a month, a year, a decade, I anticipate discovering that, in fact, these effects were fleeting, transient, ephemeral, and I'm still the same old, self-absorbed pleasure seeker I've always been. Is that how I'm supposed to think about all this? If so, thanks very much, Emerson. I already felt sad about things ending, and now I'm really depressed. But there's another way to think about travel and this voyage and what it amounts to. And here we take our cue from another American writer, one whom most people meet through one or two of his most famous books. This is Mark Twain, and he's writing 28 years after Emerson in 1869, at a moment when two big developments are changing the way middle-class Americans think about international travel. In 1869, that same year, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed across the United States, and in the same year, 1869, the Suez Canal opened. These breakthroughs, a canal and a railway, meant suddenly you didn't have to go around Cape Horn in South America or the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa like Magellan or Drake or Cook. And suddenly the possibility of traveling around the world for something less than a king's ransom and a couple of years of precious time gets downloaded onto the middle-class American wish list. And with that downloading comes a new appetite for travel narratives of trips around the world, an appetite the shrewd Twain was only too happy to earn money by satisfying. But although he was a money-making writer, Twain wasn't just a mercenary. He was also a fierce moralist, especially when it came to appraising his fellow Americans. And here are two sentences from the conclusion to his 1869 book, The Innocents Abroad. He says, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." So here are two ways to think about travel, or travel together, on this voyage. On the one hand, according to Emerson, its effects aren't as deep or as lasting as we'd like to think they are on us, or as we might like to think they should be, because the selves we inhabit aren't so easily changed and revised. We may like to think that a voyage around the world, passively enjoyed or passively endured, is a fast track to global consciousness, but it isn't. Or it isn't necessarily and automatically guaranteed to be one. Those of us who boarded the Explorer as self-absorbed pleasure seekers, whom we can abbreviate as SAPs, and are complacently happy to be that way, are going to be getting off SAPs too. No need to worry. Our friends back home will have no trouble recognizing us, whether we're 18 or 80. We can breathe easy. We haven't failed if we haven't changed. On the other hand, according to Twain, for those of us who recognize our sapsish tendencies, but who aren't so happy about them and who do look for ways to moderate them and get beyond them in some constructive fashion, travel has the potential to make a huge difference in developing one's moral sensibility, and therefore it follows that travel is not simply a hobby or an enjoyable form of recreation for the privileged. It is a moral obligation, especially for Americans who wield a lopsided amount of power over people beyond their borders. Travel keeps one's moral sensibility fit, as books keep the mind fit, or exercise machines the body, but you gotta keep on doing it, or else. You don't have to choose between these views. It's not a matter of either or, Emerson or Twain. It's a matter of both and. Yes, it's true that all by itself a voyage around the world won't give us a complete psycho-spiritual makeover. And if we passively expect it to, we're kidding ourselves. Real psycho-spiritual makeovers, to the extent they're possible at all, take a long time and a lot of hard work, a lot of hard travail, a lot of strenuous travel, both inward and outward. Fellow Americans and fellow voyagers with passports from 18 other countries, there ain't no fast track to inner transformation for most of us. But it's also true that privileged people must make the moral choice of whether or not to exert themselves actively, to keep themselves morally fit, to develop their awareness of and sympathy with the rest of the world to the greatest extent possible within the limitations imposed on them by the selves they inhabit. And that kind of exertion is another kind of travel, another kind of hard, active work, another kind of voyage, one that is ongoing throughout a lifetime, one that will lead to new situations and opportunities for exerting oneself towards something other than self-absorbed leisure-seeking. What it comes down to is that when somebody asks you, how was the voyage? One right answer is, there's no was about it. There's only is and will be. Our voyage is over. Let our voyages begin.